You're listening to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast, episode 137. Welcome to the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. I'm your host, Paula Price, lawyer turned certified executive coach. This podcast was created to empower women lawyers just like you to create a life and practice you love. Join me every week for a break from the hustle so we can focus on you, what you truly want, and how you can create it. If you're over the overwhelm, done with putting out fires, and ready to redefine success on your own terms, you're in the right place. Ready for today's episode? Let's dive in. Happy New Year! If you are listening to this episode when it goes live, we are in week 1 of 2024. How exciting is that? I hope you've had an amazing holiday. You're probably getting back to work or anticipating a return to work very soon. And I'm excited for you, for the year ahead, for all of us. The promise of a new year is so very exciting, and making a plan for the new year is also so very exciting. If you are a longtime listener to this podcast, then you know there's nothing more that I love more than sitting down and writing out a plan. To me, this really is mapping out your future, and it is one of the most exciting and fun and satisfying things that you can do with your time. And today we are going to devote this entire episode to helping you craft a business plan for your practice. Now, if you're listening to this podcast episode at some other time, maybe it's another time of the year, maybe you're listening to it a year from now, which is kind of a cool concept to think about. No worries. This can be done at any time of the year. It's just that many people will do it at the beginning of the calendar year. So if that's you, the timing will work out for you. And if you have a plan already, then you might listen to this episode and think about how you might tweak your plan. If you don't have a plan, this might give you some suggestions and ideas about how you can proceed with a plan. And of course, if you ever have questions about your plan, you're always welcome to reach out to me. So, dear friend, today, what are we talking about? 3 things. Number 1, why have a plan? Now, you may already be persuaded, but we're going to dive into this anyways. Number 2 is what to include in your plan. So I'm going to offer some suggestions for you to include in your business plan. And then finally, how to make use of your plan. I love creating plans, and I don't want the exercise to stop there. To me, the real magic of a plan is that you then get to bring that plan to life. And that is the most rewarding part of creating the plan. So we're going to cover those 3 areas: why have a plan, what to include in your plan, and then finally, how to make use of your plan. So let's start out with number 1, which is why you should have a plan. Now, you've probably heard the expression, I think it was Winston Churchill who said, failing to plan is planning to fail. Now, for some of you, you may enjoy living a life that doesn't have too many plans in it, that you like to go with the flow, and maybe you would consider yourself a little bit reactive. You like to kind of go with what's coming. Your practice is based on the demands and you respond to those demands. And that is all well and good. However, even if that's you, I would encourage you to think about having a plan. Now, the reason why I think having a plan is important is number 1 is it gives you clarity about where to focus your energy. So you get to sit down and think using your highest level of thinking, using your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that is designed to think and plan ahead at the highest level. You get to sit down and focus on what it is that you want to accomplish. Now, you may be given a plan by your employer. This might be a business plan exercise that your law firm asks you to do every year, and you sit down and you do it because somebody asks you to do it, in which case that's great. You've already got a template that you can work with. Or you may be in an environment where nobody's asking you to do a plan. But even if that's the case, I would encourage you to take it upon yourself to create your own plan. Now, when you have that plan, then you get to have a framework for how it is that you want to conduct yourself over the course of the year. Now, yes, you may like to be in that go with the flow, see where the action is, follow the demand. That's great. However, I would also invite you to think about how excellent it can be to harness your creative energy to create something that you truly, truly love. Now, if your employer has a format that you're following, that is a very good signal about what it is that they would like to see. They have given you a blueprint for how it is that you can succeed at that firm. So I would invite you to take that blueprint and use it to your advantage. If what you're looking for is to succeed in your environment, look at the categories, think about why they've chosen those categories, and think about the activities that you want to do in relation to each of those categories. Now, the exercise is not to make your law firm happy, although I'm sure it will make them happy to see that you've put thought into your plan. I invite you also to look at that plan and how it's going to benefit you. It's like if your parents are telling you to eat your vegetables and you're eating your vegetables because your parents tell you to, that's one thing. It's really great. But what I'd also like you to see is how it aligns with your goals. So if your firm has a plan and it's asking you to put in activities for business development or skills development, then I would ask you to think about how doing those exercises is going to help you grow and thrive as a lawyer. The plan that they may have designed aligns with your goals. And what I invite you to think about is how your personal goals align with the plan that you're completing. Again, this is in the case where the plan is designed by somebody else. And to the extent that you have goals that may not be represented on that plan, how can you incorporate goals in a way that they do align? Or maybe even ask yourself if you need to have a separate side plan, maybe an addendum, where you add a few additional components that are ones that will truly be meaningful to you. Now, if you are creating your own plan from scratch, there's nobody else's plan that you're following, then I invite you to do it in a way that most serves you. There's no one right way to create a business plan. The goal here is to make it useful for you. And your plan will look different depending on the nature of your practice. If you are a solo practitioner and you are responsible for all facets of running your firm, your plan is going to look different from a lawyer who's working in a firm whose plan is focused on their practice, but not necessarily as much of the business operations of the firm. Now, your plan becomes a roadmap and it will set out your direction. And I invite you to create it in such a way that you can check in with that document over the course of the year. And at the end, it will take you to your final destination. And if you had a business plan last year for 2023, you may be reaping the benefits of that plan this year. So before you start writing anything, I invite you to do a bit of reflection on the efficacy of last year's plan. Did you say and do what you said? Did you do what you said you would do? So did the things that you did align with the plan that you set for yourself? Were there areas where you would like to challenge yourself more this year than you did last year? Were there aspects of your plan that weren't particularly useful or plans that you didn't follow? And you might ask yourself, why not? You might also ask yourself, what will be different for you this year? Now, if you didn't catch last week's episode, it was all about creating sustainable success in the new year. So if you're looking for an opportunity or some guidance for tracking some of your successes and areas for growth stemming from last year, by all means, go back to that episode and listen to it. I invite you to do that with a pen and paper handy because there are a lot of questions, a lot of prompts. Similar to today's episode, it's really inviting you to think about your practice, your specific practice, and to imagine what it is that you are trying to create. So that was step one, is why have a plan? And hopefully at this point, you feel like having a plan is a useful exercise. One last thing there is when you do create your plan, I encourage you to create a plan that is a document that is not so heavy that you can't go back to it. I like simple business plans because they are easier to follow. They're clear. It's not this gargantuan document that you have to wade through. And I am pretty bad at this. Sometimes I'll create a plan and it'll get heavy. I'll just add too many things to it. And then I need to take that plan and then pare it back, just take out the essential items. So you might find that your plan becomes a little bit too detailed, in which case you might develop a one-pager that you can refer back to that makes it simple. That's where you go to check in. Are you on track for what you want to do in a given year? So step 2 is what to include in your plan. Now, if you've got a model to follow, then that's fine. You can go with that. If you're looking for ideas for business plans, I invite you to Google them. You'll find lots of different ideas on the internet. A couple of ideas where you could start. The Law Society of Ontario has a sample lawyer business plan, and I will link to that in the show notes. So you might look at that for some ideas about what you might include in your plan. I'd also encourage you to check out the business model canvas, and I'll put this in the show notes as well. The reason I like this business plan is that it is a one-page document and it has different sections and you can see them all on one page. They've each got a quadrant or a square. There's like a physical space for each of the elements of the business plan, and it's all on one sheet of paper, so you can see it all at once. Now, when you look at the categories of the plan, whether it's the Law Society's plan, whether it's the Business Model Canvas plan, or some other plan that you find on the internet, you just need to ask yourself whether or not the categories that they have proposed are relevant to you. And if they're not, either you discard them or you sub in something that is more useful. Again, the idea isn't to create the perfect plan. The idea is to create the perfect plan for you. So those categories need to align with your practice. Now, the categories we're going to focus on in today's episode, there are 5. One is revenue. One is market for your work. 3, I should say. So 1 is revenue, 2 is market for your work, 3 is practice areas and skills, 4 is relationships, and 5 is growth. And I'll just share a few highlights from each of these categories. Now, revenue is a starting point, in my view, for a business plan, because ultimately the business is designed to generate revenue. And if you're a lawyer in practice, you may have a revenue goal. If you're a solo practitioner, for example, chances are you're very attuned to what you need to generate in terms of revenue to make your business profitable, to make your law firm thrive. If you're a lawyer, an associate, for example, at a law firm, then you may not be so focused on revenue in the sense that you may have a salary that is set. There may be a bonus structure in addition to that salary. So there's some calculation of revenue, but there may not be a ton of flexibility. If you're in government, for example, your revenue may be static regardless of what you are doing in a given year. You might also be in an environment where your revenue really is sensitive to the inputs that you contribute. So the revenue goal will look different for everybody. It may simply be it's a billable target, whether it's the target that you need to reach to satisfy your contractual requirement for your job, or whether it's bonus territory billable hours that will entitle you to increased revenue on top of what you're already entitled to. There's many different ways this could play out. And so for you, I just ask you to think about, what is the revenue goal that you have for your practice? Now, one thing that is really great, actually, there's a few things that are great about revenue goals. Number one, they are very easy to measure. If you create a revenue goal, it's very easy to tell whether or not you hit the dollar value that you set for yourself or the number of billable hours that you set for yourself. So it's a very measurable thing for you. The other really great thing about a revenue goal is that it tends to be an umbrella goal or an anchor goal. It's the type of goal where in order to achieve that goal, you probably also need to reach a number of other sub-goals. Sub-goals like practice management, client development, efficacy of your work. So there's a lot of different criteria that come into play when it comes to reaching a revenue goal. So it's a great overarching goal that you can have that will lead other aspects of your practice. So what you want to think about here is, what are the components of your revenue goal? And again, if your revenue goal is not billable hours or the actual dollars, because your compensation isn't sensitive to what you do, it's not linked, then you might also think about whether or not your goal is a promotion, right? Getting into a different position in your organization, elevated, whatever that looks like. So what will you need to take into account? Likely you're looking at your sources of work. You're looking at the number of transactions, the work that you'll do to generate, whether it's billable hours or flat fee revenue. You may be looking at other sources of revenue. If you've got revenue on top of, strictly speaking, legal work, maybe it's speaking, creating materials for your clients. And then you'll also want to look at things like your rate. If you control your billing rate, you might want to increase your rate next year or this year. You might also be thinking about where you might be losing money. So, for example, if you have a high degree of write-offs, whether these are write-offs that you are doing yourself, sort of self-editing before you put your time on a timesheet, or this is editing after you've put your time on a timesheet, then you'll want to think about what is going on there. What are the challenges that you're having in terms of keeping all the time, first of all, capturing your time, and then making sure that you're billing at a ratio that works for you, that is consistently in the right zone for you. And if not, why not? And this is a challenge that a lot of lawyers struggle with, especially practitioners who are independently billing. There can be concerns about the clients being fee sensitive. There can be concerns about whether or not they can justify the fees, etc. So I would just invite you to think about not only where the revenue sources are, where the work sources are, but also where you might be missing out on revenue opportunities that you may be having currently. So that is number one, is the revenue goal. Number two is the market for your work. Now, the first thing to consider here is your clients, and your clients will be different depending on the nature of your practice and where you're at in your practice. So you might hear people talk about having internal clients, and for junior lawyers who work in a law firm environment, typically you start out by having a number of internal clients, the lawyers who effectively feed you work. If you are working in the office of a multi-office, international, or even national firm where there's multiple offices, your clients may actually be lawyers from other departments within your firm, other departments in other offices of your firm. And so you might be looking to them for work. And so those are also internal clients. You don't necessarily need to be a junior lawyer to have these as your internal clients, but you'll want to keep them in mind when you're thinking about where it is that your work is coming from. Now, of course, there's also the external clients, and these are the direct consumers of your legal services. Sometimes you have individual clients who come to you independently. Sometimes you have an institutional client who sends you work on a repeated basis. You might also think about referral sources. So these are typically lawyers out in your professional circles who refer work to you. Sometimes they are lawyers who have a complementary practice. So you might be a litigator and you have relationships with solicitors and they refer you work, and vice versa. You might also have lawyers who are in the same practice area as you. You might be a litigator. They're also a litigator, but when they can't take a file because there's a conflict, they would send the file over to you, or they would refer you to the client as a potential option, and you may do the same. So you want to think about who your referral sources are. You may also have referral sources within the industry. So if you're in banking or real estate or one of those areas where there are potential institutional clients, then you might think about how you could, and these are institutional referral type clients, you might think about how you could develop relationships with them. So what you want to do here is, first of all, identify who your clients are, your existing clients, and then focus on how you can build your relationships with them over the course of this calendar year. You will also want to identify clients who are not yet your clients, who you would like to attract and bring closer to you. So on that latter point, this idea of bringing in new clients, I would invite you to think about how you are marketing. And marketing kind of gets a bad rap. I actually don't think it deserves that negative connotation. Whatever type of marketing you engage in, I encourage you to pick something that aligns with you as a human being, that you feel good doing, that you're not going to feel, not something that you're going to dread or put off or procrastinate or simply not engage in. So think about what appeals to you. The best marketing that you can do is to do excellent work. So you want to make sure that the work that you do is of the highest quality that you're capable of. You want to attach excellence to you as a professional. You want to have that reputation of being excellent to work with your clients, responsive, respectful, all of those things. So the more you work at that high level, the greater your clients are going to appreciate working with you, and they will then tell others about you, and you'll organically develop a greater market for your work. That being said, I wouldn't necessarily stop there unless you find that that is sufficient to keep you busy and potentially more busy than you have capacity for already. I would invite you to also think about other ways to market your work, because you can be excellent, but if nobody knows about you, then it can be hard for you to attract the work that you would like to do. So marketing, in my view, is about increasing your visibility. So letting other people know about the type of work that you're doing, and also forming relationships with others who may be your clients, who may not be your clients, but who ultimately know about you and the work that you are doing. Now, one way of doing this is just to simply talk about your work, and that allows people to know what it is that you do and how you can help. So I think some of the most effective marketing can be those conversations that you have casually with somebody about what it is that you do. And when they see you talking about the type of work you do, whether it's transactional, whether it's litigation, whether it's family, and you're talking about your work in a way that inspires confidence, then they will remember you when they are talking to somebody else who is, at this point, unknown to you, and that person is describing their problem. They would then be like, hey, you know what? I was just speaking with this lawyer who does exactly what it is that you're describing. Let me put you in contact with them. So you want to talk about what you're doing in a really positive way. That can be really effective marketing, and it doesn't really require you to go out of your normal course to do it. I also invite you to think about how you can provide value to people without them having to retain you. And I'm not talking about providing free legal services to people off the street just randomly, but the idea here is you have specialized knowledge as a lawyer, and there are opportunities for you to share that knowledge with others, and that will empower them to make decisions, whether it is hiring a lawyer, whether it is better understanding their problem, whether it is the reassurance that something that they're experiencing is quite common. And so you want to kind of deliver that upfront value. One way to think about it is this pink spoon analogy. If you ever go to Baskin-Robbins and they've got 30 some odd flavors of ice cream, and when they offer you that pink spoon and you sample a flavor, you're like, that was really great. I think I want more of that. You might also find you sample it and you realize not quite for me. So if you're out there talking about your work and offering that value, you'll effectively be able to pre-screen some of the clients that will want to work with you, and also maybe some clients who will not want to work with you, which in a way sounds a little bit sad, but in the grand scheme can actually be quite helpful. It's probably better that if there's not a good fit for you and a particular client, that you don't get too far down that route before you realize that. So what are some ways to do this? I already mentioned informal conversations where you talk about the work, what you love about it, what you're doing. Speaking in a more formal sense, whether that is speaking to other lawyers in a professional capacity, giving them updates in the law or similar practice points. It might be speaking to potential clients. It might be speaking to communities. It depends on the nature of your practice. It might involve writing papers. So you might have a continuing education organization that you are working with, and you might write a paper for them. You might do blog posts on your law firm website. You might do articles. You might do interviews. You might engage in the traditional networking, so attending industry events, finding people that you find really interesting, who you want to cultivate a relationship with, and asking them out for coffee, taking them out for lunch, so that traditional networking. It might be getting involved with a bar organization or a continuing education organization. There are lots of board positions that you could apply for, volunteer opportunities to get involved. So you want to find ways to learn more about what is going on in the industry, finding ways to present as an authority. You could get involved with your community, whether it's in a legal component or a non-legal component. And if you want ideas about how to market in a way that does not feel cringy, then I'd invite you to go back to a podcast episode that I recorded, I think it was last year, with basically that title. I think it's Cringe-Free Marketing for Lawyers. And that will give you some more prompts and questions that you can think about when it comes to how you're going to market your services. So that is category 2. Category 3, let's look at your practice areas and skills. When you sit down to write your business plan, you have an existing practice. You have areas that you're practicing in right now. You've got skills that you have developed up until this point. And what I invite you to do is to forecast into the future and ask yourself where you want to go. What skills do you want to develop further? What practice area do you want to develop further? It might be that you're very happy where you are, and so you want to be doing more complicated versions of what you're currently doing. Or it may be that you're not loving your current practice area. You've discovered a practice area that is more appealing and you want to shift your practice in that direction. So think about where it is that you want your practice to go. And in particular, also what skills you need to develop. So if you're a litigator, you might be looking at specific advocacy skills and thinking about how you can improve on each of them. You might be thinking about transactions. So if you're a transactional lawyer, maybe there are certain types of transactions that you want to get more experience with. So you want to be putting yourself in the position to attract that kind of work. Now, a lot of business plans are going to ask you what sets you apart from the competition. So ask yourself that. What sets you apart from all the other lawyers that are out there in the industry? And believe it or not, each lawyer will have a very unique value proposition, and your job is to ask yourself what that is. So what is different from you, about you when it comes to practicing? And some clues, some ways to uncover that could be performance reviews. If you're at a stage in your practice where people are giving you performance reviews and evaluations, notice some of the themes of what you're doing really well. That's a pretty good indication. It might be client feedback. They might be telling you what you're doing that's great, that sets you apart. You might also give yourself a self-evaluation and ask yourself, what are some of the things that you do naturally that are maybe come easily to you, that you do better than anybody else? So you want to design a profile for yourself about what differentiates you from everybody else. I would also invite you to think about how your skills can be highly specialized. There was a speaker, and I forgot who it is, but he was talking about how the way to sort of guarantee that you have no competition is to develop a really highly specialized skill set. So for you, you might think about all the different facets of your practice, all the facets of your professional life before you started practicing law, or even that you're engaged in currently. You might think of your personal attributes, maybe hobbies that you have, interests that you have, and think about how all of these pieces come together to give you highly specialized knowledge that nobody else possesses. Because when you're able to do that, you get to set yourself apart based on your skills. You will be able to find work at a higher level of compensation, potentially, ideally, because of that specialized knowledge. Then I would invite you to think about what it is that you need to do to further develop your skills. So that might be actually doing the work. That is probably the best way to develop your skills in a practice area, is to actually do the legal work. Whether that's soliciting new work, whether it's seeking out new lawyers or new clients to work with, it might mean taking on pro bono files, but get yourself into the file because that's the fastest way you're going to learn. You might also think about research that you can do independently, whether it's reading or taking some courses. You might think about training. So this lines up potentially with your continuing professional development requirements in Canada. That's very common. Most provinces require some level of ongoing education. So that can align quite beautifully. You might also think about speaking and writing. Sometimes the way that you become an expert in a practice area is by throwing yourself into it, by learning everything that you can, by speaking, by writing about it. And so there's all these different ways that you can get involved and to learn the skills that you want to learn. And then finally, as you're developing these new skills, how do you let other people know that you have these skills or that you're developing these skills? And again, I'd invite you to think back to that marketing and the conversations that you're having, who it is that you are able to share this with, who can in turn send that work your way or help you to practice those skills. So we've gone through 3 items already. The first was your revenue goals. The second was marketing. The third was developing your skills and narrowing or expanding potentially your practice area, going in the direction that you want. Number 4 is relationships. So here I would just invite you to consider relationships in addition to clients that you want to cultivate in your professional life. So these may be other members of your organization. They might be outside of your organization. They may be lawyers or people who are in your professional community. And here you are looking for mentors, for example, because they can provide guidance, because they can help you make decisions. They're somebody that you can confide in if you're having challenges. You may think about sponsors. So sponsors are a little bit like mentors, but they tend to have a more proactive role in your professional advancement. So they may give you work. They may advocate for you for a promotion. And then you might also think about colleagues that you want to develop. Who do you want to develop relationships in your work? Once you have identified the individuals that you'd like to have as mentors, as sponsors, as closer relationships with your colleagues, then I would invite you to create a plan. Now, this might make your eyes roll. The idea of creating a plan to cultivate relationships might seem a little bit contrived, and I get it. But at the same time, it can be a really great way for you to simply get clarity and focus over who it is that you want to develop relationships with in your professional spheres. And that to me is actually not a bad thing. I think it can be extremely rewarding, especially when you start to find that those relationships come to fruition. So the fifth category is growth. So for you in your business plan, I would invite you to look at the plan for the year. That is a typical duration for a business plan. And I'd also invite you to think about what you want your practice to look like at 3 years out, at 5 years out, 10 years out, if that's something that you're okay doing. Now, most of the lawyers that I talk to, when I ask them to look 3 or 5 years out, or especially 10 years out, they freeze up a little bit. They feel like this is a question that's too hard to answer, that they don't know where they want to be in 3 or 5 years. Some of them do know the answers, but many do not. So if that is you, don't worry, you're not alone. What I would invite you to do, if you don't have a clear picture, is to simply take a guess. Knowing what you know now, what do you think you would like to have happen in 3 to 5 years? And you can always let that shift, but it will give you a form of GPS that will allow you to see your year in the context of a greater goal. Now, when you're thinking about growth, I would also invite you to turn your mind to practice management and the relationship that you play within your practice. So if you think of yourself as a very junior lawyer and what your practice looks like or looked like at that stage, you've got maybe an assistant that you're delegating to, and chances are you've got a lot of people who are delegating to you. So the exercise here then becomes thinking about how that shifts over time as you gain seniority. You will have increasingly large numbers of people who you will delegate to. And you will also find that your role changes on your files. So you might go from somebody who knows bits and pieces here and there about what's going on to someone who knows a lot more about the file and is managing components of it, further on to somebody who is leading the file. And your practice is going to look different at each of these stages. So I'd invite you to think consciously about how you want to be growing the team that will support you in your practice. I'd also invite you to think about the systems that you have in place and the practices that you have to use those systems. So by systems, this means things like, your timekeeping systems or checklists that you have for processes that you do repeatedly, those types of systems. And for practices, I'm thinking more along the lines of how do you conduct your time management, your practice management, week to week, day to day. And I've got lots of podcast episodes about that. What I typically recommend there is to have a practice, right? A weekly planning practice, a daily planning practice, something to keep you on track. And your goal here is to find a way to manage your workload, to complete tasks in a way that feels good, where you're doing the quality of work that you want, where you're not feeling super reactive in your practice, that you've got a plan, you know where things belong, you know how you're going to get things done. And overall, what you're able to achieve is a level of sustainability, right? You have a certain level of comfort with your practice and you feel like it is sustainable. Now, the last thing I want to talk about here is a category I didn't mention at the beginning. So again, just going back, we have this idea of your revenue goal, we have your market, we have your skills, we have your relationships, we have growth. Those are all categories that you might include in your business plan. And then finally, just some general comments about a business plan. Often a business plan will have an executive summary or some sort of mission statement. So once you've gone through the exercise, I always recommend doing that at the end. Once you've gone through the exercise of planning your year, give yourself an executive summary or a mission statement, something that sums up in a sentence or two what you see yourself doing over the course of the year. So it might be, my name is Paula Price. I am a certified executive coach who provides coaching at the highest level to lawyers who are seeking greater fulfillment at work, whether through enhancing the job that they have or by finding a new one, something like that. And then you can add more about how you would make that happen. You would obviously be doing it from the perspective of a lawyer. You want to curate your plan to suit you. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, you can find lots of templates online, but the real magic to a business plan is one that actually connects and is relevant to your specific practice. So make the categories relevant to you and make the strategies relevant to you. So I mentioned it during the marketing discussion, pick activities that you actually enjoy. It'll make your life a lot easier. It'll make your practice a lot more enjoyable. And then finally, you want to consider how you're going to actually stick to your plan. So that brings us to category 3, and then we're going to wrap up. So category 3 is really about turning that static document into something that actually has life to it, something that helps you along the way. So A few suggestions here is number one, when you're writing out your business plan, think about creating outcome goals, goals that are very easily measured, things that require you to do something. So we talked about target hours or revenues. That's a really clear goal. You know whether or not you're on track, and you'll know at the end of the year if you have achieved it. When it comes to building relationships with a mentor, for example, you might identify who it is that you want to have as a mentor. You might decide you want 3 mentors, and you might decide which 3 mentors those are, and then set about creating those relationships. You might decide you want to attend a certain number of conferences over the course of the year, perhaps as a guest. You might also decide you want to speak at a certain number of conferences over the year. You might decide you want to write a certain number of articles or blog posts. You want to deliver a certain number of talks. You might be looking at the type of work, right? And saying, okay, I want to close 3 different transactions of this particular nature. You might want to bring in a certain type of litigation work or run a certain type of application or court hearing or trial, whatever it happens to be. So I invite you to get pretty granular in terms of your goals, because that's going to make it so much easier for you to see and align your actions with the thing that you want to accomplish. And you'll also know at the end of it whether or not you actually achieved it. I'd invite you to balance, this is another suggestion, SMART goals and stretch goals. So SMART goals are, SMART, you've probably heard the acronym: specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. These are the descriptors for the acronym SMART. And SMART goals are great. They help you to put into effect goals that you set for yourself. So for example, if you pick, I want 3 mentors, Jane, Bob, and Sam, great. You now know you've got your mentors and you can go out and achieve those mentoring relationships. You'd probably want to give yourself a few more criteria in terms of what those relationships look like. How many times you're going to meet with them, what kind of topics do you want to discuss with them. You could get as granular as you want here. That's the nature of a SMART goal. And typically a SMART goal is something that is achievable, right? Great to have a plan, because that helps you figure out how you're going to get there. I would also invite you to have some stretch goals, right? The goals that are out of reach for you as you are right now, because those are goals that are going to require of you to develop new skills, to step outside of your comfort zone, that are going to require you to evolve in your practice. And so I would encourage you to have enough SMART goals that you're able to make that steady progress toward your goals and feel that sense of satisfaction that comes with achieving them, and also enough stretch goals to keep your practice exciting, to feel like you're constantly on a growing edge, reaching for that next thing. That can be highly motivating. And if you like that concept, I recorded a podcast episode about that not long ago. It will be linked to in the show notes. And so you can explore that concept more fully. The next thing I would invite you to do is to anticipate your obstacles, right? You have this great plan in place, but guess what's going to happen? You're going to run into obstacles. Some common ones: you don't have time to do it. It may be something that is not urgent. Nobody's going to know if you don't go out and grab some new mentors. So you might find it just never gets to the top of your to-do list. So that could be a challenge. You might find it's too hard. You might decide that you want to enter into a new practice area, and the minute you get in there, you realize just how hard it is when you're at the very beginning of the learning curve, and you might try to talk yourself out of it. So that might be a challenge for you that you may need to overcome. And you might find that you get started on a goal and it is so slow to yield results that you get discouraged and give up. This can happen. Getting really discouraged, getting bogged down at the beginning of a project. Sometimes it takes way more energy to get something started. And once you're started, the momentum builds and it gets easier, but that can be hard to see at the very beginning. A couple other suggestions is to keep it simple and keep it handy. So again, have a neat, tidy business plan that you can refer to frequently, so you can always check in, see if you're on track. You can even check things off as you go if that applies to you. And then finally, I'd invite you to learn and adapt as you go. So you create the document today or whenever you create that document. Let's say it's January 2024. And the reality is, life will happen. Your practice will unfold in magical ways that you never could have predicted. So don't feel like that plan has anchored you to a certain path and you can't go off of it. I would invite you to simply learn and adapt as you go. So, my dear friend, we have had a pretty intense workout here. Thank you for joining me. We have covered quite a bit of ground. If you are in the process of reviewing your business plan, writing your business plan, thinking about how you're going to stick to your business plan, I can absolutely support you with that if you'd like that support. So please do feel free to reach out to me. You're welcome to reach out by email, LinkedIn, whatever is convenient for you. I would also invite you to please rate and review the podcast. It always means so much to me to hear from you, to hear from my listeners, to know that this podcast is having an impact for you. So please do that. It will help other people like you find this podcast, and that would be amazing. So thank you. Happy New Year. I'm excited for 2024. Now we've got our business plan together, and I look forward to helping you bring that plan to life over the course of the year. So have a great week, and I look forward to reconnecting next week. Bye for now. If you enjoyed today's show and don't want to miss an episode, subscribe and follow the show wherever you listen to your podcasts. If you haven't already, please leave a rating and review. Your feedback will help me create a podcast that's tailored to your needs and goes straight to the heart of what matters to you. For instructions on how to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com/podcast launch. See you next time. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Joyful Practice for Women Lawyers podcast. If you want more information, visit www.thejoyfulpractice.com. See you next week.